This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chekris, London, UK. Nicholas Nickleby, by Charles Dickens. Chapter 17 follows the fortunes of Miss Nickleby. It was with a heavy heart, and many sad forebodings which no effort could banish, that Kate Nickleby, on the morning appointed for the commencement of her engagement with Madame Mantalini, left the city when its clocks yet wanted a quarter of an hour of 8, and threaded her way alone, amid the noise and bustle of the streets, towards the West End of London. At this early hour, many sickly girls, whose business, like that of the poor worm, is to produce with patient toil the finery that bedecks the thoughtless and luxurious, traverse our streets, making towards the scene of their daily labour, and catching, as if by stealth, in their hurried walk, the only gasp of wholesome air and glimpse of sunlight which cheer their monotonous existence during the long train of hours that makes a working day. As she drew nigh to the more fashionable quarter of the town, Kate marked many of this class as they passed by, hurrying like herself to their painful occupation, and saw in their unhealthy looks and feeble gait but too clear an evidence that her misgivings were not wholly groundless. She arrived at Madame Mantalini's some minutes before the appointed hour, and after walking a few times up and down, in the hope that some other female might arrive and spare her the embarrassment of stating her business to the servant, knocked timidly at the door, which, after some delay, was opened by the footman, who had been putting on his striped jacket as he came upstairs, and was now intent on fastening his apron. "Is Madame Mantalini in?" faltered Kate. "Not often out at this time, miss," replied the man, in a tone which rendered "miss" something more offensive than "my dear." "Can I see her?" asked Kate. "Eh?" replied the man, holding the door in his hand, and honouring the inquirer with a stare and a broad grin. "Lord, no." "I came by her own appointment," said Kate. I am to be employed here." "Oh, you should have rung the workers' bell," said the footman, touching the handle of one in the doorpost. "Let me see, though. I forgot. Miss Nickleby, is it?" "Yes," replied Kate. "You are to walk upstairs, then, please," said the man. "Madame Mantalini wants to see you. This way. Take care of these things on the floor." Cautioning her in these terms not to trip over a heterogeneous litter of pastrycook's trays, lamps, waiters full of glasses, and piles of rout seats which were strewn about the hall, plainly bespeaking a late party on the previous night, the man led the way to the second story, and ushered Kate into a back room, communicating by folding doors with the apartment in which she had first seen the mistress of the establishment. "If you'll wait here a minute," said the man, "I'll tell her presently." Having made this promise with much affability, he retired and left Kate alone. There was not much to amuse in the room, of which the most attractive feature was a half-length portrait in oil of Mr. Mantalini, whom the artist had depicted scratching his head in an easy manner, and thus displaying to advantage a diamond ring, the gift of Madame Mantalini before her marriage. There was, however, the sound of voices in conversation in the next room, and as the conversation was loud, and the partition thin, Kate could not help discovering that they belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Mantalini. "If you will be odiously, demnebly, outrageously jealous, my soul," said Mr. Mantalini, "you will be very miserable. Horrid miserable. Demnition miserable." And then there was a sound as though Mr. Mantalini were sipping his coffee. "I am miserable," returned Madame Mantalini, evidently pouting. "Then you are an ungrateful, unworthy, demd, unthankful little fairy," said Mr. Mantalini. "I am not," returned Madame, with a sob. "Do not put itself out of humour," said Mr. Mantalini, breaking an egg. "It's a pretty, bewitching little demd countenance, and it should not be out of humour, for it spoils its loveliness, and makes it cross and gloomy, like a frightful, naughty, demd hobgoblin.' 'I am not to be brought round in that way, always,' rejoined Madame sulkily. 'It shall be brought round in any way it likes best, and not brought round at all if it likes that better,' retorted Mr. Mantalini, with his egg spoon in his mouth. 'It's very easy to talk,' said Mrs. Mantalini. 'Not so easy when one is eating a damnation egg,' replied Mr. Mantalini, 'for the yolk runs down the waistcoat, and yolk of egg doesn't match any waistcoat but a yellow waistcoat, demmit.' 'You were flirting with her during the whole night,' said Madame Mantalini, apparently desirous to lead the conversation back to the point from which it had strayed. 'No, no, my life.' 'You were,' said Madame. 'I had my eye upon you all the time.' 'Bless the little winking, twinkling eye! Was it on me all the time?' cried Mantalini, in a sort of lazy rapture. 'Oh, demmit!' 'And I say once more,' resumed Madame, 'that you ought not to waltz with anybody but your own wife, and I will not bear it, Mantalini, if I take poison first.' 'She will not take poison and have horrid pains, will she?' said Mantalini, who, by the altered sound of his voice, seemed to have moved his chair, and taken up his position nearer to his wife. 'She will not take poison, because she has a demd fine husband who might have married 2 countesses and a dowager.' 'Two countesses!' interposed Madame. 'You told me 1 before.' 'Two!' cried Mantalini. 'Two demd fine women, real countesses, and splendid fortunes, demmit.' 'And why didn't you?' asked Madame playfully. 'Why didn't I?' replied her husband. 'Had I not seen at a morning concert the demdest little fascinator in all the world, and while that little fascinator is my wife, may not all the countesses and dowagers in England be—' Mr. Mantalini did not finish the sentence, but he gave Madame Mantalini a very loud kiss, which Madame Mantalini returned, after which there seemed to be some more kissing mixed up with the progress of the breakfast. 'And what about the cash, my existence's jewel?' said Mantalini, when these endearments ceased. 'How much have we in hand?' 'Very little indeed,' replied Madame. 'We must have some more,' said Mantalini. 'We must have some discount out of old Nickleby to carry on the war with, demmit.' 'You can't want any more just now,' said Madame coaxingly. 'My life and soul,' returned her husband, 'there's a horse for sale at Scrubbs's, which it would be a sin and a crime to lose. Going, my senses joy, for nothing.' 'For nothing!' cried Madame. 'I'm glad of that.' 'For actually nothing,' replied Mantalini. 100 guineas down will buy him, mane and crest, and legs and tail, all of the demdest beauty. I will ride him in the park before the very chariots of the rejected countesses. The demd old dowager will faint with grief and rage. The other 2 will say, "He's married, he's made away with himself, it's a demd thing, it's all up," and they will hate each other demnebly, and wish you dead and buried. Ha, 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 demmit!' Madame Mantalini's prudence, if she had any, was not proof against these triumphal pictures. After a little jingling of keys, she observed that she would see what her desk contained, and rising for that purpose, opened the folding door, and walked into the room where Kate was seated. 'Dear me, child!' exclaimed Madame Mantalini, recoiling in surprise. 'How came you here?' 'Child!' cried Mantalini, hurrying in. 'How came oh, demmit, how do you do?' 'I've been waiting here some time, ma'am,' said Kate, addressing Madame Mantalini. 'The servant must have forgotten to let you know that I was here, I think.' 'You really must see to that man,' said Madame, turning to her husband. 'He forgets everything.' 'I will twist his demd nose off his countenance for leaving such a very pretty creature all alone by herself,' said her husband. 'Mantalini!' cried Madame, 'you forget yourself.' 'I don't forget you, my soul, and never shall, and never can,' said Mantalini, kissing his wife's hand, and grimacing aside to Miss Nickleby, who turned away. Appeased by this compliment, the lady of the business took some papers from her desk, which she handed over to Mr. Mantalini, who received them with great delight. She then requested Kate to follow her, and after several feints on the part of Mr. Mantalini to attract the young lady's attention, they went away, leaving that gentleman